Failure is a key part of the scientific process, but women in science aren't often given the same leeway to fail as their male colleagues.
How can we create environments where failure is seen as something that's supported, where there's an openness to disclose failure without harm, and in the end, to integrate it into the life of the pursuit of knowledge?
From Virginia Humanities, this is With Good Reason. I'm Sarah McConnell. Today on the show, Failing to Succeed. Gertrude Fraser recently helped put together a meeting of the nation's top minds in STEM, but they didn't present cutting-edge research or scientific breakthroughs. They were all there to explore failure. Gertrude Fraser is an anthropology professor at the University of Virginia, and the gathering was funded by the National Science Foundation. Gertrude, for women, and especially women of color in STEM, there are real hazards in admitting work failures. Why is that?
A lot of what we do as scientists, as academics, is fail. I can tell you about ones that are more related to my family life. I was ostensibly a single mom, and I was cleaning out my closet over the summer, and I came across a folder from a therapist that had seen my daughter, and part of it were the notes that she took that she shared with me. And I was really shocked to see in it that my daughter, who's now in her 30s, and we're very close, but when she was talking to this therapist, she had said that I was rarely ever home, because I had this senior administrative job, and I was also trying to do some research and write, and I was traveling, which was very exciting for me. And I felt the blame associated with me kind of pursuing this career and the negative consequences that it had on my daughter. So there's that aspect of failure that I was really interested in, the competing commitments that we have as women in the academy, where our work as mothers or work as caretakers for family members happens, but it has to happen alongside the intensive work that we have to do as faculty members. I think academic life really builds in a recognition that it has really been created for men, and then women have had to try to sort of squeeze themselves into something that was never made for them. So I had that kind of interest in bringing women together to talk about failure and how it hits us in different kinds of ways, how we experience it, whether it's in family life, but also in the workplace and in the culture of the workplace. So that was one reason, because I had never really been to a conference that focused on those kinds of issues. In fact, when failure comes up in the kind of conferences that I've been to, they may have a few women who are well accomplished talking about, well, yes, I failed, but then I pursued and I persisted and I had grit and I overcome. And I thought, well, there's more to the story than that.
You interviewed a number of senior women in the STEM sciences about their own experiences with failure. Share some of the stories you heard that stayed with you from that.
One story which I thought was fascinating is of a young woman who was really fascinated by the natural environment. She was a geologist and loved, as a young girl, going out into the field with her parents and picking up rocks, etc. And she, in high school, got this chance to be on this project where they're going out to look at these different kinds of rocks and take samples, etc. And she grew up camping. She was very adept about being in the outdoors. So at some point, the senior field faculty member pulled her aside with the one other girl that was there and said, okay, we're going to do a bathroom run. And she was like, "What do you mean a bathroom run?" He said, "Well, I'm going to, take you in the van so you can go to the bathroom at the gas station a couple miles down." She was like, "I know how to go to the bathroom out here. You don't have to pull me aside and help me to go to the bathroom." And she said that he obviously thought he was helping her out. But what happened with that, his failure to recognize her as someone with expertise of all kind, including knowing how to go in the woods, was that she began to feel a sense of, oh, there's something different about me. There's a reason I don't belong out here. He doesn't see me as belonging. And it's not just about my competence, not just about my love and passion for these rocks. He sees my being a girl as a kind of deficiency, an extra burden that he has to take on in order to have me participate. That's one kind of failure where it's a failure to be recognized in a deep way as someone interested in the pursuit of knowledge. A lot of stories were about that, where my colleagues would talk about feeling as if they had to prove themselves all the time, that they weren't fully scientists because they were women. And so one response was to prove yourself. Well, what does that do for you if you think all the time that people don't think you've got what it takes? Well, what happens is either you begin to doubt yourself or you realize that I have to always be excellent. I cannot reveal the downsides of the work I do or my fears about the work I do.
And do women suffer from this more than men?
I think men and women in the sciences have to deal with failure. And so I wouldn't say that women suffer more from it, but I think given the ways in which women are seen as usurpers in the field of science, as not fully scientists because they're female, that the environment for disclosing failure is not necessarily a welcoming environment. I think for men, they have environments that are often very supportive. So disclosing failure doesn't have the same kind of anxieties. It doesn't necessarily lead to people questioning your career. You might even somebody say, "Look, I failed too, guy. Come along, let's go to lunch and talk about it." I think for women, there are higher stakes. And for minorities in general, there are higher stakes in disclosing failure because the environment is not supportive, and neither is it supportive of failure disclosure.
Give me an example of where a woman of color, let's say, especially felt the burden of having to stay always in proof of her professionalism.
Yeah. One colleague talked about entering a math classroom. She absolutely loved mathematics. And so she decided she was going to major in math. And this might have been in the 80s, I want to say. So she stepped in the classroom. The faculty member is up front, and he's reading out the names of the students in the class and directing them to where they could sit. John Brown, you sit third row to my left. Reginald, you sit second row to my right. And he went through all the guys in the class, and there she stood, waiting for her name to be called. And he looked up at her and he said, "You can sit wherever you want to sit. You're not going to be here for long anyway." And that's one moment, again, where the spaces were not even made available for her. She said, "There was no seat for me." He already had kind of predicted how I was going to do. And she said she felt so out of place. But at the same time, she felt like, you know what, I'm gonna show him. I am going to work so hard. I'm gonna get the top marks in this class, which she did. She was one of the top two students in the class and the only woman in the class. But nonetheless, immediately what she learned was that I am marginal to this game, to this situation. And so in that context, it was impossible for her to fail or to disclose her failure because it would simply just prove the faculty member right. And that was absolutely something she refused to have happen.
Is it your goal to urge women to be more open about their failures or to teach their colleagues in universities as a whole to be more open about it and how important it is for them to recognize the importance of failure in their colleagues and not stigmatize it?
Yes, I think that we all as academics have a complicated relationship with failure because we live with it all the time. But of course, the whole drive in the academy is to be successful, right? Professionally successful, successful getting grants, successful publishing papers. And that creates a conundrum for us because having this bias to success stifles our willingness to take risks because we don't want to fail. We don't want to have our failure exposed. We don't want a failure disclosed to others. How can we create institutions, cultures, environments where failure is seen as something that's supported, where there's an openness to disclose failure without harm, and in the end, to integrate it into the life of the pursuit of knowledge?
Have you come to a better place in your own life when it comes to understanding and appreciating your own failures?
That's a really good question. It depends on the day.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I applied for a National Science Foundation grant. I brought together a team of colleagues who all were doing different things around failure and failure disclosure. And I created a kind of lab team. And I said, let's think about how we might create conversations with a very low bar of entry so that there was not a lot of anxiety about it. And let's have a conversation about failure disclosure in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. People at first were very suspect. They were thinking, well, if I go to this, are you suggesting that I'm a failure? Gertrude, are you stigmatizing me by inviting me? Why did you invite me? Is it because you think I failed particularly well? And so we had to do a lot of work for people to begin to see the vision and the power of coming together to talk about these issues. And the deep thinking together, the emotions was amazing. It was just powerful. We came to know each other in ways that we would not have in a regular conference or in the regular departments that we're in. And then after that, I have to tell you that I've been at the university for 30 years and I'm an associate professor. I have not been promoted to full. And I'm tearing up now because this is tremendously shameful for me. I have been a senior administrator. I have been in my department. I've had millions of dollars of grants. I have created and designed programs to help women in STEM. But yet here I am. I'm an associate professor. And I feel a sense of failure about that. So it depends on the day. I don't think this is something we work through and then we just, we got it and we just move forward. It's a constant part of our lives because our lives are so shaped by these ideas of performance, and these ideas of success. And so now I'm struggling again. My disclosing that is something is difficult for me, but I'm just doing it, disclosing it to you because I think it's important because I know I'm not the only one that had this kind of issue. And so now, just like my friend whose teacher didn't call her name, didn't give her a seat, I feel like I have to make my way into that classroom again and kind of prove myself. And I find a language to talk about my work to convince some group of people that I should be promoted to full. So it's constant work to navigate failure, in these cultures of performance and success.
Gertrude Fraser, I'm so honored to have you talking with me here today on With Good Reason.
Thank you so much.
Gertrude Fraser is an anthropology professor at the University of Virginia. Her Disclosing Failure conference was funded by the National Science Foundation. Maybe you were watching the Paris Olympics when Kate Douglas won gold in the women's 200-meter breaststroke.
On the breaststrokes, the American Kate Douglas in lane 4, trying to hold off Smith. It's coming down to the final couple of strokes, but Kate Douglas is going to win the Olympic gold for the U.S.
My next guest was in Paris to cheer Kate on to her historic victory. Ken Ono is a math professor at the University of Virginia. He applied his math research to help Kate shave 0.4 of a second off her breaststroke. Ken says it took countless failures to save just a tiny fraction of time, but it ultimately proved to be the difference between winning and losing. Ken, you're a renowned number theorist mathematician with international acclaim. You were a child prodigy, son of a brilliant mathematician who said you understood infinity by age 3. But a powerful feeling of failure and not good enough stalked you through your young life. Why?
Well, it stalks me even to this day, and I'm 56. You are right. As a child, people studied my mathematical talents. And in the second grade, I was asked to take the SAT test. And so the idea that I should be good in mathematics was what I was supposed to be able to do with ease. And so I became frightened of situations where I couldn't get a perfect score. And I began to think that my value as a student was purely based on test scores, grades, and the pursuit of accuracy. And so by the time I was in high school, I came to despise math because that's what I thought mathematics would be. And I'm so pleased that that's not the case. We fail all the time.
You actually begged your parents to let you drop out of high school.
I did drop out of high school. There was quite a bit of parental pressure. My father was a distinguished mathematician at Johns Hopkins. So from an early age, I was groomed to be a mathematician in the image of my father. And that was pretty frightening, right? And so by the time I was in high school, there was nothing I wanted to do more than be nothing like what my parents wanted for me.
I know you're not alone.
Right. I have 2 brothers. The oldest brother was groomed to be a pianist, and he ended up going to Juilliard on full scholarship. So he has become a professional pianist. The middle brother, Santa, it turns out he's the most successful one. He didn't do well on tests in middle school. So my parents had very low expectations of him. They just wanted him to go work for a bank or work for a company. And what's ironic about that is he's now president of the University of Michigan. So he's by far the most successful of the 3 of us.
In your undergrad years at the University of Chicago, you dove into almost everything but math. You joined a frat, you played endless foosball, you partied, you really got into competitive cycling. And then in your 3rd year, you were stung by criticism from a visiting math professor.
That's right. When I started in college, I still thought like a child, and I thought that it was a good thing to be able to get by in my math classes by putting in very little work. You see, the University of Chicago, the math classes are difficult. It's very time-consuming, and the last thing I wanted to do was my homework. So I played foosball. I joined a fraternity. I was a DJ for the parties, and, well, it caught up to me by the time I was a junior. A professor said, I know your dad, and you're not living up to his expectations, but somehow that is okay. You can go work for a bank. And that was not only humbling, that professor was in part right, and I was quite angry with him. I didn't respond by saying, I'm going to prove you wrong, but it was a wake-up call that I desperately needed.
Maybe the lowest point in your life came after a math conference in Montana, and you hoped to impress the attendees with this brilliant, highly technical presentation. But it was too technical, and it went over their heads, and they were lost and criticized you for it. You were devastated.
Yeah, so this is not unusual. And so when I gave my very first talk at an MAA conference, the Mathematical Association for America, in Missoula, Montana, where my wife's family is from. My dream was to become a professor at Montana. And so this talk was important. The mistake I made was that I spent all of my time talking about the beautiful few lemmas, little ingredients in the proof that meant everything in the world to me, without taking the time to explain why any of the problems I worked on should matter to anyone in the audience. And that's a rookie mistake. And, well, I paid the price for it. I don't think anybody clapped. Yeah. Maybe there was some polite clapping. But yeah, it was a disaster.
Your proof of umbral moonshine conjecture has applications in fields from number theory to quantum physics.
That's right.
I have a party trick for you.
Uh-oh.
Can you describe the umbral moonshine conjecture in a way that maybe I could appreciate it, even though I don't understand it?
Oh, so gravity is the most powerful force we don't understand, right? If I drop this pen, I know it's going to fall on the floor, but I don't know why it happens. And mathematics, through the work of Newton, famously allowed us to discover planets like Pluto and Neptune just based on the mathematical equations and the observations of planets that we could see through telescopes. We discovered those planets before you could actually see them with your own eyes. However, if you apply the same mathematical equations to stuff that's closer to us, Venus, Mercury, Mars, the mathematical equations to early scientists predicted that there should be a planet orbiting inside the orbit of Mercury. There should be a planet that's closer to the sun than Mercury, and they called it Vulcan. But of course, there is no planet Vulcan, so does that mean Newton's equations, laws of gravity, are false? No, what it means is that we're trying to apply those equations in settings where they weren't meant to be applied. And Einstein, through his theory of relativity, did away with a large part of this fallacy. What Einstein recognized is that if you take into account the relativistic effects of the sun, there wouldn't have to be a Vulcan. But now here's the problem. What is the transition theory that ties together Einstein's theory to Newton's theory? What is the theory of gravity? And it turns out that the umbral moonshine conjecture is a toy problem along the way that is a piece in that pursuit.
To have your understanding of math and to have the understanding of math, numbers, and ideas the way your colleagues and others that you have admired, Einstein, Newton, and others, do you think your brain is wired differently than perhaps mine?
Well, I mean, no two people are the same, right? So it's much less about mathematical talent versus we all have our own talents. With regard to my skill, the skills that I use in my work today have nothing to do with the skills that my parents and others saw in me when I was a second grader. I was good at doing calculations in my head. But make no mistake, that's not the mathematics that is the secret to some of the success I've had. I like to think about science as an art. I like to think about how the equations are somehow supposed to be elegant and beautiful if they are meant to describe the world around us. So maybe my mind isn't that different from you. We're sitting in your lovely office, the studio here at Virginia Humanities, and you think often about the art, poetry, human stories, so on and so forth. And maybe what I do isn't that different, except the stories are about the numbers.
You know, when I was struggling through school, I comforted myself thinking, well, Einstein failed math and Churchill failed English. Maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel. Which of your failures do you now see as a gift?
Oh, well, in my work, if I succeed 3 or 4 times in a year, please keep in mind that I'm thinking about my research almost every day. I wake up, the first thing I'm thinking in the morning is, how do I attack such and such a problem? So I fail all the time. I think I've had a great year if I succeed 3 or 4 times. For me in my work, whether it's with the swim team or whether it's in my research, in failing, maybe what you're actually doing is you're earning the right to succeed by learning what does not work, earns you the power and the confidence to try different approaches to problems.
Now you're about to race to the Olympics in Paris, and I know that you have been helping the coaches at the University of Virginia swim team who have some Olympic swimmers shave their times down.
Right.
How are you doing that? And are you doing it because your son was a terrific swimmer and you know some things about swimming? Or are you doing it with math formulas?
So first of all, I like Olympic sports. Ever since I was a kid, I looked forward to following the Olympics on TV. You are right. My son was a collegiate swimmer, and so swimming has somehow been in the family for quite some time. And I was an amateur age group triathlete, so I wanted to improve my swimming myself for selfish reasons. So how do we improve swimming? Well, when we first started our scientific approach to swimming, we had no idea what we were doing. The first accelerometers I bought were meant for tracking sharks in the ocean. Um, but we've come a long way. And what I apply is really the scientific method. I failed a lot. If you want to talk about lists of failures, there's a ton of them. But what we do now is we assembled what I call our digital twins for each individual athlete, where we can identify parts of execution which lead to unnecessary deceleration. A fish swims effortlessly, whereas our best Olympians are doing everything they can to swim 6 miles an hour for maybe 20 seconds.
What you're saying is you're looking for one aspect of their body movement that is impeding speed.
Right. And throughout the course of a swim, it could be a head position. It could be the angle in which you choose to execute your first kick exiting a wall. All of the little things that might cause deceleration we look at and we try to wipe out.
Name one or two that you saw.
Oh, so in Streamline, this is a part of the breaststroke swim where an athlete is trying to not lose any speed before they surface to begin the swim. Well, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in that execution. The anchoring of the legs, not pointing the toes, not pointing the fingers correctly. Each one of those things could mean a time loss. One of our most celebrated athletes, her name is Kate Douglas. She's actually one of my graduate students. In her case, we were able to save 1/10 of a second in her streamline. She's not swimming at all. She's just gliding through the water. And that streamline is executed 4 times in a 200-meter swim. So she saves about 4/10 of a second. And I'll tell you, she just set the American record by only 0.29 seconds. So without that little savings, no American record. And she's a favorite for a medal in 2 weeks in Paris.
You know, this show will not air until all this is over. Will you be able to watch her?
I'll be there in Paris. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Will you be whispering in her ear?
Texting, yeah. At this point, she has to mentally get in the zone and execute what is her optimal race. If she does that, we'll be pleased, and I think the outcome will be really good.
Ken Ono, thank you for talking with me on With Good Reason.
Thank you, Sarah. My pleasure.
Kate Douglas won 2 gold and 2 silver medals in the Paris Olympics. Ken Ono is a math professor at the University of Virginia. He was one of the presenters at Gertrude Fraser's Disclosing Failure conference at UVA. This is With Good Reason. We'll be right back. Welcome back to With Good Reason from Virginia Humanities. Mona Danner says money matters. When she was a kid, her father used to say, if you don't ASK, you won't GET. Now she's paying that wisdom forward. She's teaching seminars on the art of negotiation to help women in STEM break through the gender pay gap. Mona is a professor emerita of sociology and criminal justice at Old Dominion University.
Both my parents very much believed that it was important to take care of yourself and your family and your community. And part of that responsibility was in regards to financial matters. And they early on showed us how they wrote checks. They said, here's how much money we have. And so my parents very much said, you can have just about anything in life that you want as long as you work for it. But you also have to ask for it. People can't read your mind. And so when you realize you want something, you have to ask for it so that you can get it. And you sometimes have to strategize with regards to how you're going to get it, because just asking oftentimes isn't enough. So another thing, Sarah, I'd like to share is that I grew up at a time when the Sears Wish Book came out at Christmas time, at the holidays. So we were told Santa would bring us $25 worth of things from the Wish Book. And so we would spend a month trying to decide what we wanted.
You've been teaching the art of negotiation to women in the STEM fields since the 1990s. Why women in STEM fields in particular? Are women in STEM fighting an uphill battle when it comes to negotiating for job and salary?
Women in all fields are fighting that uphill battle. As an academic, I was very aware of women in academia, that women were paid less than men. And then as I looked more into the disciplines, I saw that the salary differences in STEM were quite dramatic. Let me give you an example. So currently, and this data is from last year, it's National Science Foundation data. The median earnings of those in STEM with bachelor's degrees or higher, for men, it's just over 97,000, and for women, it's just over 74,000. That's a difference of $23,000. Women only earn 76% of what men earn. In a 30-year career, that's $698,000. Of a 40-year career, that's $930,000. And that's assuming no raises. And we know raises are a percentage of the base salary. In addition, most retirement packages are calculated as a percentage of base salary. So in all disciplines, but I think particularly in STEM, women earn dramatically less money, significantly less money than do men. Money matters. And I want to make sure women get as much money as they can.
Do you think that most of that difference is because for years women weren't in the field, and so these are more experienced men who've gotten raises years ago that are making more money, and young women who are entering the field in greater numbers now who are making less money?
Yeah, no, almost from the very beginning, even if you track, even if we control for everything we can think of, the type of job, the industry, the degree, women make less. And from the very beginning of their careers, women make less than do men. It's terrible, and it's bad for the women, it's bad for their families, it's bad for their communities, it's bad for men as well. It's bad for employers. Employers might think, oh, I can pay them less. What they don't appreciate is that then that breeds resentment. And that's not a good thing to have resentful employees, because while initially women might be happy with their salary, as soon as they get into the workplace and realize that the man who's working next to them, who's no better than they are, who has no more experience than they do, is making more, that is not a good situation for anybody.
Have you had that experience?
I did. Initially in my career, I negotiated more money than I was initially offered for my position. And I was very pleased about that. Somehow, at the end of the first year, the man who was hired at the same time I was got a bump of a raise, about $1,500. I did not find that out until the end of my second year, at which point I went to my supervisor and to then their supervisor, and I said, this is not okay. This needs to be fixed immediately. And I was very clear in my own mind that if it wasn't fixed, I would be leaving.
And was it only the threat of leaving that you think really worked for you?
I think it was that I was very clear and very firm. I didn't threaten to leave. I just very clearly said there is no justification for this. This is inequitable. I believe this is discrimination, and I believe this needs to be fixed immediately. And it was fixed.
So, what about women who aren't consciously depending on the man in their life to be earning most of the money, but who feel satisfied with that and who think, okay, well, at least one of us is earning the big salary. It's okay if I'm the lesser salary, right?
Sarah, a man is not a financial plan. We have to have our own money. Women have to have their own money. The best relationships may end for a variety of reasons. Women need to have their own independence. Everybody needs to have their own financial independence. I want every woman I work with to be able to have money so that she can enact her own values as well as to get the life that she wants to live.
So, what are some of the simple techniques you're teaching women when it comes to negotiating salaries and jobs?
Well, the first thing is that I teach them to be clear about what it is they want and to be objective, like how much money do they want, or what are the conditions of work that they want. For instance, they might want to work remotely, or they might want more money for research or travel, whatever it is they want. Might want a promotion. So I teach them to, first of all, say, what is it you want? I then talk to women about that. Oftentimes, we don't negotiate because we don't know that we can negotiate. Secondly, we don't know how to negotiate. And then we're afraid to negotiate. And one of the things I always do is I ask an audience, I say, take a moment and think about, when was the last time you negotiated something? And particularly in a room of women, they will think of the last time they negotiated a salary, or perhaps buying a car or a house. What I remind them of is that they negotiate all the time. Where do you want to have lunch today? Who's going to pick up the kids from daycare? Which family are we going to for the holidays? In reality, we're negotiating all the time. We're trying to come to an agreement with someone about something we want. And then I talk about various tactics. I encourage women to think about what they want, how to ask for it, and then about writing it out, scripting it out, writing it out, what they're going to say, and then speaking it out loud to practice it as though it were a play. Like if you're asking your employer for a raise, what are the things your supervisor is likely to say? And then what do you want to say in response to that?
So let's say a woman says, I want a $15,000 raise. How do you have her go on from there?
First, begin to justify that raise. It's not so much that she wants it, but why she has earned. And hear that verb tense, she's earned that raise. And so she needs to explain to the employer why she has, the things she's done to earn that raise.
So let's say the employer might say, yeah, but we had a fairly lean year this year. Our bottom line didn't grow, can't do it.
Yeah. Understand our bottom line didn't grow as much as we had wanted to, but in fact, we did see an increase of 5% in sales. In addition, a large reason we got that increased 5% in sales was my own unit in the company. And you yourself had told me that I was a major contributor to making that happen. I believe that I should share in that increased revenue stream. I note that the CEO is getting a raise, and I have done the work that has made the major contribution to our increased revenue this year.
What are some other pushbacks one might get from an employer that you need to think through your response on?
The employer may say things like, well, we can't do it right now, but let's, maybe next year. And at that point, it's like, I don't want to talk about next year. We need to talk about this right now. Because oftentimes they'll put it off. They don't want to deal with it right now, so they'll promise something into the future. Another pushback might be something like, well, everybody else in your unit makes the same amount. That might be true, but no one else in my unit has led the programs quite the way I have. No one else has been as successful in directing those programs as I have. So the point is that your employer has set a salary. You've got to justify why you are worth more than what the employer has offered you.
How important is negotiating the initial salary? What difference does it make whether you make a little more or a good deal more when you first get hired?
Sarah, one of the things I say is, unlike love, salary is forever. And particularly your base salary. That initial salary matters so much because everything that comes after that is a percentage of your base. Let's say, to make it easy, you get a 10% raise. If you started a job at $50,000 and you get a 10% raise, you get an extra $5,000. That's a lot of money. But if you started out at $55,000, you're getting an extra $500 raise because you're getting a 10% raise of $5,500. Over the course of your career, those differences grow dramatically. Raises that are a proportion of your salary grow much faster. Research by the American Association of University Women suggests that those small differences can result of $1 million of difference over the course of one's professional working life. That's a
Oh my
lot of
gosh.
money. That's a lot
Yeah.
of money.
In the many years you've been teaching women how to negotiate this way, are you finding that younger women more recently are feistier, stronger, and ready to negotiate and stick up for themselves?
Certainly some are, but the other thing that's happened is levels of anxiety and depression have increased dramatically among the young, and particularly among young women. Social media has been terrible to undermine the confidence of young women. So while some young women are feisty, a lot of young women are anxious and depressed and don't have much confidence. And more people are isolated. And the more time we spend alone, not interacting with other people, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to be comfortable with other people, and we spend more time in our heads rather than engaging with other people and practicing the skills of social interaction.
Well, Mona, this is such a gift to us that you're sharing with us how to do this and what the problem is. Thank you for talking with me on With Good Reason.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure.
Mona Danner is a professor emerita of sociology and criminal justice at Old Dominion University. My next guest says talent alone isn't always enough for students to succeed in STEM. They need outstanding teachers and opportunities to develop. Josephine Rodriguez is a biology professor at the University of Virginia College at Wise. She's dedicated much of her career to broadening participation in STEM. Josephine, tell me about your own experience in biology. When you were young, did you always realize that you'd be on that trajectory for your career?
I didn't know I was going to be a biologist until I was an undergraduate. But what broadened my mind to biology was an outstanding high school biology teacher, Mr. Gross. I look back and think I owe him so much of what I've been able to do in my career because he shared his passion for biology with me and all his students. And then that really was the first step in really discovering your own passion is when someone shares theirs with you.
Why did you like his class? What was he like?
Well, what really stood out was the insect collection. And it was the major project for the semester. And I remember how seriously he took the insect collection and the preparation for the insect collection, and then how seriously I took the insect collection. And then also, I was really good at it. I was really freakishly good at collecting insects and then pinning insects and preparing that insect collection. And it was the first time in my life I was exposed to such an activity. We went on a field trip and he would collect the insects, and then the joy he had in looking at all the collections and grading all the collections. So I'm an entomologist by training, and it probably would not have happened. I would not have become a PhD entomologist if it wasn't that start with Mr. Gross.
Is it true that a new species of insect has been named after you?
2 species, actually. Yes, there's 2 species of parasitic wasps that are named after me. So those are from Costa Rica, and those were named by a collaborator, Jose Triana Fernandez, and then in collaboration with our mentor, Dr. Daniel Jansen and Dr. Winnie Hallwax. So I've had excellent entomology mentors, and yes, I do have 2 species of parasitic wasps named after me.
You're a child of immigrant parents. Do you think
Yes.
it was especially important for you to have somebody like the biology teacher, Gross, believe in you at a young age?
Oh, absolutely. If you want to broaden participation in STEM, one of the kind of key components is having outstanding teachers. And Mr. Gross, who I hope hears this one day, he was that outstanding teacher for me. You can't broaden participation in STEM if you don't first broaden the brains and the exposure and the experiences of young people. And that's what teachers do. And that's what the outstanding teachers do. And that's what Mr. Gross did. I was a young person with a lot of potential, but that potential wouldn't have developed if I didn't have Mr. Gross, if I didn't have outstanding professors, if I didn't have outstanding collaborators. So that's why we have to broaden participation, because there's so much potential, and that potential is never mobilized, that's never realized without opportunities and outstanding teachers.
And the National Science Foundation awarded you a very large grant to support that kind of diversity in science. What does it pay for?
That was in 2018. That was $650,000 entirely to the UVA Wise campus. What that $650,000 grant paid for was a lot of scholarships. So 60% of that budget had to go directly to scholarships for students with financial need. So we had students that are talented. We have a lot of remarkably talented students at UVA Wise, but they had financial need. So that the scholarship money went to helping pay the cost of attendance. So instead of having to maybe work part-time to cover those tuition costs, the scholarship covered those tuition costs. But what that grant also paid for was these support structures and these interventions that we were testing to see if they were effective in supporting students, because it wasn't enough to have a student with financial need that's talented just to help pay their bills. They need to know, what are those other support structures? What are those other investments that we need to be making so these students can be successful? So the students that are from a rural area, that are largely first generation, what else can we be doing to support these students to be successful?
And have you seen some of those students really benefit from the scholarships?
Well, one of our students, Isabella Maggard, who is now beginning her PhD in environmental microbiology at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, she published a paper in Nature Scientific Reports, which is an extremely prestigious journal. She's a brand new college graduate. She's 22 years old, and she's first author on a paper. And the study that she published was supported in part by the STEM grant, because one of the things the STEM grant implemented were these research tracks. These research tracks, one was in environmental genomics. Isabella and a few other students were placed in that research track, and they had an extraordinary mentor, my colleague, Dr. Bruce Cahoon, and they were given the opportunity to think of a question and develop an experiment and carry out that experiment. And we've got a little bit of money from the NSF grant to pay for those costs. But why that grant was so important was that this was an investment in young people. So this was a little bit of money that allowed us to invest in young people to develop as scientists. And now Isabella has a first author publication in a super prestigious journal. And now she's starting her PhD in microbiology at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
You're also working with professors themselves to foster equity in STEM.
Yes.
How's that done? How do professors foster equity in STEM?
At UVA Wise, I had 3 awards. One of my awards was an advance award, and the advance is gender equity in STEM fields. And again, that's funded through National Science Foundation. And we have shown in our advance work that yes, it helps promote equity when women can have the infrastructure to connect and to collaborate. So when women that were normally would be isolated in their respective campuses, as maybe you're the only biochemist, for example, in your department, now you can leverage this kind of national consortium and then be able to connect based on meaningful topics to you and form these affinity groups across the country. But as for broadening participation in STEM, equity is part of it, but also it requires opportunities. Young people need opportunities. They need investments to develop as scientists. And for example, a research experience on paper may just be like, okay, that's $5,000 to pay for the stipend and a few $1,000s to pay for housing and supplies. But those investments, that allows young people to develop as scientists. That allows them to develop their talents that may not have otherwise been developed. Because like I've said before, talent's everywhere. Talent is everywhere. And talent doesn't care about your zip code or what school you went to. But opportunities are not everywhere. And if you want to broaden participation, you need to broaden the opportunities and you need to make the investments in young people.
Josephine Rodriguez, thank you for talking with me on With Good Reason.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Josephine Rodriguez is a biology professor at the University of Virginia College at Wise. With Good Reason is produced by Virginia Humanities, which acknowledges the Monacan Nation, the original people of the land and waters of our home in Charlottesville, Virginia. Our production team is Allison Quantz, Matt Darrow, Lauren Francis, and Jamal Milner. Andrew Rice is our intern. Special thanks to Jenny Taylor for booking assistance. For the podcast or to comment, go to withgoodreasonradio.org. I'm Sarah McConnell. Thanks for listening.